The flight attendant stopped at row 1, looked down at the woman in seat 1B, and smiled the kind of smile that is not a smile at all. "Excuse me, sweetheart." She said it loud. Loud enough. "I just want to make sure you know first class has a certain standard. And I say this kindly, a black woman in hospital scrubs sitting in 1B tends to make our other guests a little uneasy. Maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere you actually fit in." Then she picked up Serena's boarding pass from the tray table without asking, turned it over once and set it back down like a verdict. The man in 1A looked up from his phone, glanced at Serena, and laughed once through his nose. "She probably used someone else's ticket. You know how that goes." Brenda smiled at him like he'd said something clever. Then she leaned back toward Serena, lowered her voice just enough to make it feel private, while keeping it perfectly audible to the 4 surrounding rows, and said, "Honey, the cleaning staff entrance is actually around back. Just so you know for next time." The woman in 1B did not move, did not speak, did not blink. Just looked forward with the absolute calm of someone who has survived things these people could not imagine in their worst nightmares. 3 rows back, a man quietly closed his book. Upside down. "Don't go anywhere. What happens next on this flight will stay with you for a long time. Drop your location and local time in the comments right now, and if you believe that dignity cannot be stripped from someone who truly knows their own worth, hit subscribe. Because this story is only just beginning." The alarm on Serena Wade's phone went off at 2:47 in the morning. Not the gentle kind. The specific, aggressive, no-argument tone she had assigned to the hospital's emergency line 18 months ago after the 3rd time she had slept through a softer sound during a night she wasn't supposed to be on call. She was a trauma surgeon. Sleeping through that sound was not something she could afford to make a habit of. She was already half awake when it rang. The kind of half awake that trauma surgeons develop over years of interrupted nights, not quite asleep, not quite present, existing in the shallow water between the two in a way that allows the body to rest without ever fully releasing the mind's grip on the day. She had been in that shallow water since midnight. The call pulled her the rest of the way out. Multi-vehicle accident on I-90. 6 critical patients inbound. All hands needed. She was in her car 11 minutes later. Cook County Hospital at 3 a.m. has a specific quality of light. Fluorescent, relentless, the kind that does not acknowledge the hour or the exhaustion of the people moving beneath it. Serena had walked under that light hundreds of times in 12 years on staff, and it had never once felt welcoming. It felt correct. It felt like the right light for the work being done beneath it. She scrubbed in at 3:21. The first patient was already on the table. She did not leave the OR until 7:44 in the morning. 4 hours and 23 minutes across 3 separate surgeries. A man who had gone through a windshield. A woman whose steering column had done things to her chest that Serena would not describe at dinner tables. A 17-year-old boy whose parents were in the waiting room and whose odds when he arrived were not the kind of odds that produce optimism. The boy made it. They all made it. Serena stood in the scrub room afterward with her hands under running water and felt the specific hollow exhaustion that follows the kind of work where the stakes are measured in whether or not someone's child comes home. It was not a bad feeling. It was simply a very heavy one. The kind that settles into the body at the cellular level and does not fully lift for days or war. She had a flight to catch at 8:15. The conference in Atlanta, the Society of Trauma Surgeons annual symposium, had been on her calendar for 7 months. She was presenting research she had spent 14 months building. 42 slides, 1,100 attendees. The kind of professional moment that does not reschedule without consequences, she was not willing to absorb. She had packed her bag the night before. It was in her car. She had planned to go home shower change into the blazer and slacks hanging on her closet door. That was the plan. The plan lasted until 2:47 a.m., and then it became a different kind of morning. She drove to O'Hare still in her scrubs, hospital badge still clipped to her chest, a travel mug of coffee that had gone cold somewhere on the expressway sitting in the cup holder. She was going to change when she landed. She had a room at the Marriott near the convention center 40 minutes from Hartsfield-Jackson. She would shower change look like the person her conference badge said she was, and nobody in Atlanta would ever know she had spent the previous 4 hours with her hands inside people's chests. That was still the plan when she walked through the terminal. When she cleared security, when she reached gate B14 with 6 minutes to spare and handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who looked at her scrubs, looked at the ticket, and said nothing because the ticket said what it said. Seat 1B, first class, window side. She had booked it 4 months ago on a Tuesday evening after a particularly long shift sitting in her car in the hospital parking structure because she hadn't had the energy to drive home yet. The upgrade cost $340. She had looked at the number for a moment, thought about the 17-hour days that had produced the money to spend it without flinching, and clicked confirm. She did not think of it as a luxury exactly. She thought of it as the one flight she would not spend folded into a middle seat in coach with her knees against the tray table trying to review slides on a screen too small for the work. She thought of it as 4 hours of actual space in which to be a person rather than simply a body being transported from one obligation to the next. She settled into 1B with the careful movements of someone operating on the last reserves. Put her carry-on in the overhead bin. Sat down. Looked out the window at the ground crew moving across the tarmac in the gray early morning light. Felt the specific quality of stillness that descends on early flights, the collective exhaustion of people who set alarms. They resented, pressing down on every row like shared weather. She closed her eyes. 1 second of stillness. The first since 2:47 a.m. It lasted approximately that long. The man settling into seat 1A was Howard Greer, 55 years old, Atlanta-based real estate developer with a portfolio valued at somewhere north of $280 million, a fact he found ways to reference within the first 4 minutes of most conversations. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than some people's monthly rent, a watch that cost considerably more than that, and the specific, groomed confidence of a man who had been deferred to for so long that the muscles required to consider another person's perspective had simply atrophied from disuse. He noticed Serena the moment he reached row 1. The scrubs, the badge, the single carry-on rather than the matched luggage set his wife had selected for him the previous evening. He said nothing immediately. He simply looked the way certain people look at things they have already categorized before examining them, and took his seat with the unhurried ease of a man who has never once questioned whether a space was meant for him. Serena did not look at him. She was looking out the window, hands folded in her lap, eyes carrying the specific and patient exhaustion of someone who has been awake since before the city remembered what day it was. And in the galley at the front of the cabin, behind the narrow curtain, Brenda Cole was watching all of it. Brenda Cole had been a flight attendant for 19 years. She had 2 HR complaints in her file, both from black passengers, both from the previous 3 years, both resolved with the specific institutional language that resolves things on paper without changing anything in practice. She was not a stupid woman. She was a woman who had never once been made to feel that her instincts were wrong, and that absence of consequence had done what the absence of consequence always does. She watched Serena settle into 1B. She watched Howard Greer glance over and look away. She watched the badge, the scrubs, the quiet. And something in her made a decision before the cabin door had finished closing. She walked out of the galley with a stack of warm towels draped over her arm. She moved down the row. She handed one to the man in 2A, one to the woman in 2B. She reached row 1. She handed a towel to Howard Greer without breaking stride. She walked past seat 1B without stopping. Serena watched her go, said nothing, turned back to the window. Outside, the ground crew was finishing its work. In 12 minutes, the plane would push back from the gate. In 14 minutes, it would be in the air. In 4 hours, it would land in Atlanta, and Serena Wade would go to a hotel room shower and put on the blazer and slacks she had been planning to wear since Tuesday. That was still the plan, but Brenda Cole was already turning around at the end of the aisle. And the expression on her face was the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was walking back toward it. Brenda came back down the aisle with the specific, purposeful stride of a woman who has decided that something needs to be addressed. She stopped at row 1. She looked at Serena. Then she looked at the overhead bin above seat 1B. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Serena looked up. Her expression did not change. She reached into the front pocket of her scrub top and produced the boarding pass, handed it over without a word. Brenda looked at it, looked at the seat number, looked at Serena, handed it back. "And a photo ID, please." Serena reached into her bag, drew out her Illinois driver's license, handed that over too. Brenda examined it with the careful attention of a woman looking for a discrepancy she has already decided exists. She found none. She handed it back. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She simply held the license out and waited for Serena to take it. The way you return something to someone when you have decided it is not your responsibility to acknowledge the indignity of having asked for it in the first place. Howard Greer in 1A had not been asked for his boarding pass once. Not when he boarded. Not now. He was looking at his phone with the focused attention of a man who has noticed something happening beside him and has made the deliberate choice to find his screen more interesting. Serena put her license back in her bag, said nothing, turned back to the window. Brenda remained at row 1 for a moment. Then, "I'm also going to need you to move your bag." Serena looked up again. "The overhead bin above 1B is reserved. I should have mentioned it when you boarded. You'll need to move your carry-on to the bin above row 4. 4 rows back, past Greer, past the couple in 2A and 2B who had just watched the ID exchange without intervening, past the man in the gray jacket in row 5 who had set his book down and was watching all of it with an expression that had not yet revealed itself as anything in particular. Serena stood, opened the bin, took her bag down, carried it 4 rows back and placed it in the bin above row 4, without a word, without an expression, with the specific and controlled composure of someone who has learned that the cost of reacting to certain things in certain places is always paid by the person who reacts rather than the person who provoked. She walked back to 1B, sat down. 40 seconds later, Howard Greer's assistant, a young man named Tyler, 26, who had boarded with the business class cluster and taken his seat in row 3, stood up and placed his own bag in the overhead bin above row 1. Brenda, passing through the aisle, glanced at it, said nothing, kept walking. Serena watched all of it from the window seat. Her hands were folded in her lap. The hotel was 40 minutes from the airport. She had a presentation to give in 8 hours. The 17-year-old boy she had kept alive this morning was in a recovery room at Cook County with his parents sitting beside him. She focused on that last fact, the way she had learned to focus on useful things when the surrounding noise became too expensive to process. She reached up to press the call button. She needed water. She had not had anything since the cold coffee in her car, and as she reached, the sleeve of her scrub top rode up past her left wrist. Just slightly. Just enough. The tattoo was there for a moment in the recycled cabin air, an eagle's wing curving over a caduceus, and beneath it in clean, precise letters, the words Recon Med and the Roman numeral 9. Then her sleeve fell back and it was gone. In row 5, the man in the gray jacket did not move. But something behind his eyes shifted in the way that things shift when a mind that has been operating at one level of attention is suddenly required to operate at another. He looked at the back of the woman's head in 1B for a long moment. Then he looked at the book in his hands. Then he set it down on his tray table, face up, spine visible. He had been reading it from the back. Page 241 going backward toward page 1, the way he had read every book for the last 11 years. A habit he had developed in the field when he needed to keep his hands occupied without signaling to the people around him that his attention was somewhere else entirely. Nobody in the cabin had noticed. Nobody ever did. He looked forward again. Howard Greer had put his phone away. He was looking at Serena now with the open and unapologetic curiosity of a man who has never developed the instinct to disguise what he is thinking when he is thinking it about someone he does not consider worth the effort of discretion. "You a nurse," he said. Not unfriendly exactly. The tone of a man who asks questions he has already answered for himself. Serena looked at him. "Surgeon." Greer processed this for a moment. His eyes moved to the scrubs, to the badge, back to her face. He smiled the smile of a man who has decided that what he is about to say is a reasonable thing to say, and that the person he is saying it to is not in a position to make it uncomfortable for him. "Surgeon," he repeated. "Cook County, huh?" He glanced at the badge. "That's what county hospital public system. Yes." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are not agreeing with anything, but want their face to be doing something. I mean, no offense, I always figured the county docs flew coach, you know? The real money's in private practice." He smiled again. "Must be nice though, right? Getting that government salary and still treating yourself." He said it loud enough. The woman in 2B looked up from her magazine. The man in 2A found something to study on his tray table. Serena looked at Greer for exactly 2 seconds, with the level, unhurried attention of a woman who has assessed situations considerably more dangerous than this one, and found the experience on the whole unimpressive. Then she turned back to the window. Greer took her silence as an absence of objection. "Since when does the hospital send the cleaning staff business class?" He said it half over his shoulder toward Tyler in row 3, just loud enough, just casual enough to wear the costume of a joke rather than the thing it actually was. Tyler smiled without committing to it. 2 passengers nearby heard it. One of them looked away quickly. The other did not look away at all. Brenda, emerging from the galley with a beverage cart, caught the tail end of it. She smiled at Greer the way people smile when they agree with something they have decided not to say out loud. Then she began the drink service. She worked her way methodically through first class. Water juice, the small bags of mixed nuts in the white dish. She gave each passenger her full attention for exactly the right number of seconds. The woman in 2A got a warm smile and a second offer of orange juice. The man in 2B got his coffee before he finished asking. She reached row 1. She set Greer's water on his tray table, centered. No spill, the practiced precision of 19 years. She turned to 1B. She placed Serena's water at the very edge of the tray. Not centered, not secured. Right at the lip of the plastic, tilted 2 degrees toward the stack of conference papers Serena had arranged on the tray table. 42 pages of research representing 14 months of work, and the reason she had been awake since before this city remembered what day it was. The glass tipped. The water went across the tray table in a single quiet sheet and soaked the top half of the stack before Serena could move. "Oh." Brenda's hand went to her mouth. "I'm so sorry, you really should keep your things more organized." She did not reach for a towel. She did not offer napkins. She did not stop moving. She simply stepped past row 1 and continued down the aisle with the unhurried ease of a woman who has just done something and has decided in advance that it was an accident. Serena looked at the papers. 14 months, 42 slides. The ink was already beginning to spread through the lower pages, soft and irreversible the way water moves through things it was never supposed to touch. She did not say a word. In row 5, the man in the gray jacket had stopped reading entirely. His name was Marcus Tillman. He was 58 years old. He was sitting in seat 5A in a plain gray jacket. Dark slacks, no insignia, no rank, nothing on his person that identified him as the man who had served as the 24th Commandant of the United States Marine Corps before retiring 3 years ago to consult for the Office of the Secretary of Defense on classified operational matters that did not appear in any press release or public record. He looked to anyone who glanced at him without training like a quiet man in his late 50s on his way somewhere unremarkable. The jacket was correct. The shoes were correct. The reading glasses were correct. He had cultivated this specific quality of civilian invisibility over 4 decades of operational life, and he was very good at it. But the book was wrong. Sea of Thunder, a hardcover history of naval warfare in the Pacific, 612 pages. He was on page 241. Reading backward from the end, toward the beginning, the way he had read every book since 2013, when a combat psychologist in Bethesda had suggested that disrupting a single small habitual pattern each day could serve as an anchor for broader cognitive reset after extended deployment cycles. He had tried it once and never stopped. It had become the kind of habit that outlasts its original purpose and simply becomes part of who you are. Nobody in the cabin had noticed. He had boarded quietly, taken his seat, ordered water, and begun the process that men like him never fully master, existing in a civilian space without the hypervigilance that 38 years of operational life builds into the architecture of a person at a level deeper than habit. His eyes had swept the cabin once when he boarded, cataloged the relevant details, exits, occupancy. The man in 1A whose body language communicated the specific entitlement of someone who has rarely been told no, the flight attendant, whose pattern of movement told him something about her relationship to the passengers she was serving, long before she said a word, and had not fully stopped processing since. He had watched the boarding pass check, the ID request, the bag relocation. He had watched Greer's comments land in the cabin with the weight that words carry when the person receiving them has been trained to absorb rather than deflect. He had watched Brenda's water glass tip and Brenda's hand go to her mouth and Brenda's feet carry her away without stopping. He had been still through all of it. The stillness of a man who has learned over 4 decades of making decisions in environments where premature action costs lives, that the most important thing is not to move until you know exactly what you are moving toward. And then Serena had reached up for the call button, and her sleeve had moved. And for 1 second, one single, unhurried second of cabin light and recycled air, he had seen it. The eagle's wing, the caduceus, the letters, the numeral. Recon Med 9. He had set his book down. He knew the tattoo. He had seen it twice before in person and once in a photograph. The photograph was in a classified after-action report that had sat on his desk for 11 days in the spring of 2019. He had read it more times than any document in 38 years of service. He had read it until he had memorized not just the contents, but the specific weight of each page, the way you memorize things that you are not able to put down. Recon Med 9 was the 9th iteration of a joint Navy-Marine classified medical extraction unit that had operated for 6 years in theaters that did not appear on public maps under a program that had been officially dissolved before it was officially acknowledged. 12 operators. 14 missions over 4 years. The unit was active until the night of April 14, 2019, in a location that this story will not name, when a mission that intelligence had assessed at 55% probability of full extraction encountered conditions that intelligence had not fully accounted for. 6 operators did not come home. The after-action report described what happened inside that building in language that was precise and operational and completely inadequate for what it was describing. It described how, with communications down and 2 wounded Marines unable to move under their own power, a single operator had made the decision to extract both of them rather than one. How she had carried the first man, 211 pounds, in full gear, a distance of approximately 1.4 miles through terrain and conditions that the report described as severely degraded. How she had gone back for the second. How she had done this with a broken left arm that the report noted in a subordinate clause, the way reports note things that complicate the narrative of what a person is supposed to be capable of. Her name in the report was Lieutenant Serena Wade. He had tried to find her after reading it. The operational security around the program's dissolution made that exercise considerably more complicated than it should have been for a man of his position. He had found eventually that she had returned to civilian medicine. Cook County Hospital, Chicago. Trauma surgery. He had not contacted her. He had not known how to do that in a way that would be anything other than another intrusion into a life that had already been intruded upon in ways that could not be undone. He had thought about it for 3 years. He had carried the after-action report in the locked drawer of his home office desk because he could not make himself file it anywhere it would be less accessible. He was on a flight to Atlanta for a Pentagon consultation that had been scheduled for 2 months. He had not known she would be on it. There was no version of this morning that he had planned for. He looked at the back of her head in seat 1B, at the badge still clipped to her scrub top, at the conference papers drying on her tray table with the water damage spreading quietly through 14 months of work, at the bracelet on her left wrist, a thin silver chain he had not noticed until just now, with 6 small tags pressed against the inside of her wrist. He could not read the engravings from 5 rows back. He did not need to. He knew what they said. Brenda Cole was coming back down the aisle, empty beverage cart, chin up, the practiced composure of a woman who has just done a thing and is returning to the business of the morning as if the thing were already behind her. She passed row 5 without looking at him. Greer was saying something to Tyler in row 3. Another comment lower this time, designed for the surrounding rows without being fully committed to the open air. The woman in 2B had gone back to her magazine in the specific way that people go back to things when they have decided that not looking is less costly than looking. Serena was looking out the window. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her papers were drying. She had not called for a flight attendant. She had not said a word to Greer. She had not turned around to look at the man in row 5 who had been watching all of this for 20 minutes with the expression of someone who has been taking a measurement and has finally arrived at a number. Marcus Tillman removed his reading glasses, folded them, placed them in the inside pocket of his jacket beside the folded letter he had been carrying for 3 weeks. Pentagon letterhead cream stock, a document he had been trying to figure out how to deliver to a person he didn't know how to reach. He looked at the book on his tray table. Page 241. He had been reading it backward for 11 years, and he had never once thought of it as anything other than a habit. He placed it in the seat pocket in front of him. He looked at the back of Serena's head in seat 1B, and then Brenda stopped at row 1 again. Brenda stopped at row 1 with the specific, purposeful stillness of a woman who has decided that something left unfinished needs to be finished. She looked at Serena. She looked at the wet papers on the tray table. She looked at the badge on Serena's chest, and the scrubs, and the single carry-on 4 rows back where she had sent it. and something in the architecture of her face arranged itself into the expression of a woman who has been building toward a thing and has finally decided the building is done. She said it clearly. She said it at the volume of a woman who is not interested in the pretense of a private conversation. "I don't know who gave you this seat, but I've had 3 separate passengers come to me since we boarded." She paused, letting that land. "You're making this section uncomfortable. I think you'd be happier in the back. We have perfectly good seats in economy, and I can have you moved in 2 minutes if you'd like to make this easy." The cabin went still. Not the gradual quiet of people losing interest in their phones. The immediate total physical stillness of people who have just heard something out loud that they understood was happening but did not expect to hear stated so plainly. The woman in 2B set her magazine down with a soft sound that was the loudest thing in the cabin for a full second. The man in 2A stopped moving entirely. Tyler in row 3 looked at the back of Greer's seat with the expression of someone who has just understood something about the man he works for that he will not be able to unknow. Greer said nothing. He was looking at his phone, or he was looking at the shape of his phone while his attention was somewhere else entirely. His jaw was set in the careful way of a man who has decided that his best available option is to neither endorse nor distance himself from what is happening 18 inches to his left. Serena looked at Brenda. She looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. The measured level, unhurried 3 seconds of a woman who has triaged dying men in complete darkness, who has made decisions in 4 seconds that other people do not make in 4 hours, who has learned over 9 years of operational life and 12 years of trauma surgery that the most dangerous thing you can do in a high-pressure situation is let the pressure determine your response rather than the facts. Then she said, "I have a boarding pass for this seat." That was all. 4 words. No elevation in her voice. No tremor. No reaching for dignity because she had never misplaced it. Brenda's chin came up 1/2 inch. "Boarding passes can be reissued. The comfort of all our passengers is our priority, and right now, she stays." The voice came from row 5. Quiet. Not raised. Not aggressive. The specific, low, complete authority of a man for whom volume has never been necessary, because the words themselves have always been sufficient. Every head in first class turned. Marcus Tillman was standing in the aisle. He had not rushed. He was not breathing hard. He stood with the absolute economy of movement that belongs exclusively to people who have spent careers in environments where stillness is not a resting state, but a discipline. He was not a large man, not in the way that commands attention through physical presence alone. He commanded it the way certain people command it, through the specific and unmistakable quality of someone who has never once needed to perform authority, because authority is not a performance for them, but a permanent and structural condition. He looked at Serena first, not at Brenda, not at Greer, at Serena. He said 1 word, quietly enough that only the first 2 rows heard it clearly. "Commander?" Something happened behind Serena's eyes, something that was invisible to everyone in the cabin, except possibly Tillman, who was looking for it and recognized it instantly, the micro-adjustment of a person who has just heard a word that belongs to a version of themselves they have been carrying quietly for 5 years, in a place where most people never think to look. She looked at him. He held her gaze for 2 seconds, confirming what he already knew. Then he turned to Brenda. Brenda looked at him with the evaluating expression of a woman trying to place someone in a hierarchy she understands and finding that the available categories are not producing a result. He was in a plain jacket. No uniform, no visible rank. He looked like someone's composed, unremarkable uncle on his way to somewhere ordinary. Sir, I'm going to need you to return to your seat. Tillman did not return to his seat. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed something. Not dramatically. Without theater. The way you remove something you have carried for a long time and have finally found the correct occasion to use. He placed his Pentagon consultant credentials on the headrest of seat 1B. Face up, visible to Brenda and to Greer, and to the 7 passengers in first class, who were no longer pretending to do anything other than watch. Brenda looked at it. Her chin came down the half-inch it had risen. Something shifted in her posture. Not collapse, not yet. But the first structural movement of a building that has discovered its foundation is different from what the blueprints described. The woman you just told to go to the back of the plane, Tillman said, completed 9 classified combat deployments in 4 years. She extracted 2 critically wounded Marines under enemy fire, alone, with a broken arm. He paused. She saved the lives of men I was responsible for. The woman in 2B made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. Greer set his phone face down on his tray table. Brenda's mouth opened, closed. I think, Tillman said, with the patient and complete stillness of a man who has made considerably more consequential decisions than this one, and found the experience on the whole uncomplicated, you should get your supervisor on the phone. Right now. Brenda's hands were at her sides. The practiced composure of 19 years was doing what practiced composure does when the situation it was not designed for arrives it was holding, but only just, and everyone in the cabin could see the effort it required. James, the lead flight attendant, appeared at the galley curtain. He had heard enough from the galley to know that the calculation he had been running since boarding intervention versus consequence had just been resolved by someone else, and that the consequence side of the equation had changed considerably in the last 45 seconds. He looked at the credentials on the headrest. He looked at Tillman. He looked at Brenda. His face went the specific, careful neutral of a man who is rapidly reassessing every decision he has made since the boarding door closed. Brenda, he said quietly, can I see you in the galley? It was not a question. Brenda looked at Tillman one more time, then at Serena. Then she walked toward the galley with the careful, controlled steps of a woman who has not yet fully understood what is happening to her, but has begun to feel its shape. In row 4, a man named Craig Daniels, 33, marketing consultant, window seat, had been recording on his phone for the last 4 minutes. He had 47 seconds of clear footage. He uploaded it to X with the caption, "Crazy woman causes scene in first class, gets escorted out." He had cut the recording at the moment Tillman stood up. The clip began with Serena sitting in silence and ended with Tillman in the aisle. He did not include the water glass. He did not include the ID check. He did not include the words, "Go to the back." In 40 minutes, the clip would have 200,000 views. The comments would be unanimous and completely wrong. And Serena, who was looking out the window with her hands folded in her lap, would not know any of it until the wheels touched down in Atlanta. The galley curtain closed behind Brenda and James, and first class was left with the specific pressurized quiet of people who have just witnessed something significant and have not yet decided what to do with it. Greer was looking at the Pentagon credentials still sitting on the headrest of 1B. He looked at them the way a man looks at something that has rearranged the room he thought he was in. His jaw was working slightly. Not speaking. Just working. The way jaws work when the mind behind them is processing something it did not budget time for this morning. Tyler in row 3 was looking at his phone, not at anything on it, just at the dark screen held in both hands like a thing to hold. Tillman had not returned to row 5. He stood at the front of the cabin for a moment longer, and then with the natural ease of a man for whom sitting beside strangers in confined spaces has been a professional constant. For 4 decades, he settled into the empty seat across the aisle from Serena. Seat 1A was occupied by Greer. The seat across the aisle 1C was empty. He sat in it without asking, without explaining, with the complete absence of self-consciousness that belongs to people who make decisions and live with them entirely. He looked at Serena. She was looking forward. Her hands were folded in her lap. The wet conference papers had been straightened into a stack and moved to the side of the tray table, damage contained as much as it could be contained. She had not looked at Tillman since he sat down. She had the specific and total composure of someone who is managing a great many things simultaneously and has made the calculation that adding one more is currently possible. "I read the after-action report," he said quietly. She turned her head, looked at him, said nothing. All of it. 11 times. He held her gaze with the level steadiness of a man delivering information he has been carrying for 3 years and has finally found the right person to deliver it to. The April 2019 report. Recon Med 9. Final operational cycle. The cabin around them had the soft ambient noise of a plane in flight. The engine hum, the recycled air, the distant movement behind the galley curtain, where Brenda and James were having a conversation that was costing at least one of them something significant. It was enough sound to give this conversation a version of privacy. Serena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You're Tillman." It wasn't a question. Yes, she had known his name from the report. Not the full report, the redacted version given to the 2 survivors, which contained enough to understand the chain of command, and not enough to answer the questions that chain of command had produced. She had carried his name for 3 years in the same place she carried the other things. Not with anger exactly, with the specific weight of an unanswered question that has been living in your chest long enough that you have stopped expecting it to be answered and started simply learning to breathe around it. "You approved the mission," she said. "Yes." The word landed between them without defense and without apology, because Tillman was not a man who offered either without meaning them, and he was not yet finished. The intelligence gave 55 to 45 odds of full extraction. He said it the way he said everything, quietly, completely, without managing the edges. That is within operational parameters for a mission at that classification level. I looked at those parameters every single day for 11 months after the report came across my desk. The math has not gotten easier to carry, not once. Serena was very still. "The page that described what you did inside that building," he continued. "I have read it more times than any other document in 38 years of service. I have never finished it without sitting quietly for several minutes afterward doing nothing at all." In the galley behind the curtain, James's voice was low and controlled and continuous. Brenda's voice was not audible. What was audible just barely was the specific silence of a person receiving information about the consequences of their actions for the first time in a setting that will not allow them to dismiss those consequences as manageable. Greer in 1A had opened his laptop. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at the back of it, which is a different thing entirely. Serena looked at Tillman for a long moment. Then she asked him the question. The one she had been carrying since the morning she woke up in a medical facility in Landstuhl, Germany, and counted the beds and understood for the first time in a sustained and unavoidable way what the number 6 meant when it was applied to people she knew. "Did you know," she said, "that we wouldn't all come back?" Tillman answered her. Not the version of honest that presents the acceptable remainder as the whole truth. The complete version delivered with the specific care of a man who has been waiting 3 years to give it to the right person. He told her about the intelligence gap. The 3 pieces of field assessment that had not been fully integrated before the mission was greenlit. He told her that he had identified those gaps in the post-operational review and had spent 11 months determining whether the outcome would have changed if the integration had been complete. His conclusion, arrived at after 11 months of deliberate and unsparing analysis, was that the answer was probably not. Probably. That word had lived in his chest alongside the 6 names for 3 years and had not gotten smaller. Serena listened to all of it. Her hands remained in her lap. The bracelet pressed against her left wrist, the silver chain, the 6 small tags. She did not look at it while he spoke. She did not need to. She always knew exactly where it was. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told him about Devin Haynes. She had seen his name 3 months ago in a Veterans Care Network update. A brief entry, Corporal Devin Haynes, formerly of a unit whose designation had been redacted, current placement at the Atlanta 5A Rehabilitation Center. Physical therapist. The city she was flying to. She had bought the conference ticket 7 months ago. She had bought the connecting appointment, if you could call it that, an unannounced visit to a man who did not know she was coming, approximately 72 hours after she had seen his name in that update. She had not told anyone. There was no one in her current life who would have understood what it meant without an explanation that was longer than she had the capacity to give. Tillman listened the way men listen when they are hearing something they did not know they needed and have just recognized it. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his gray jacket, and he placed 2 things on her tray table beside the stack of damaged conference papers: a photograph and a folded letter on cream Pentagon stock. "Before I tell you what those are," he said, "I want you to know that the 6 names on your bracelet are going to be spoken out loud in a room that matters." Serena looked at the items on her tray table. She did not touch them yet. "When?" she asked. "Before the end of the year." Outside the window, the cloud cover had thinned. Somewhere below, the country was continuing its ordinary business roads and fields, and the small geometry of lives being lived without knowledge of the conversation happening above them. Serena looked at the photograph. 12 faces in desert gear. A location that did not appear on any map that had ever been made available to the public. She looked at the 6 faces she could no longer call. She did not look away. The photograph was small, worn soft at the corners from weeks of daily contact with the inside of a jacket pocket. 12 figures in desert-pattern gear standing in front of a structure that had no identifying features in light, that could have been morning or evening in any of 4 countries that this story will not name. They were not posing. They were standing. The way people stand when a camera appears, and they have been trained to treat it as a minor interruption rather than an occasion. Serena looked at it for a long time. She found herself in it immediately. Second from the left, younger, a different weight behind her eyes than the weight she carried now. The kind of difference that is not age exactly, but experience of a very specific kind that age alone cannot produce. She found the 6 faces she could still call Devin Haynes, third, from the right, 26 years old, in this photograph, grinning in the particular way of a man who grins when he is trying not to let the camera know he is nervous. She found the 6 she could not call. She looked at each of them for the same amount of time, not rushing past the ones that cost more, not protecting herself from the specific gravity of Marcus Webb's face at the far right, 29 years old, who had been the best field medic in the unit, and who had died performing the function he was trained for, doing the thing he was built to do, in the dark, in a place that did not officially exist. She looked at all 6 for the same amount of time, because that was what she had. Equal time. It was the only equity still available to her. "Devin Haynes is in Atlanta," Tillman said. "He has been for 2 years. VA Rehabilitation Center on Claremont Road. He is doing well." Serena looked up from the photograph. "The other survivor," Tillman continued, and here something shifted almost imperceptibly in the quality of his voice, the way a room shifts when a door opens somewhere deep in the building, is you. She already knew that. She had known that since Germany. But hearing it stated plainly by the man who had read the report, who had counted the same number she had counted in the same document, who had carried the same math, hearing it from him in this cabin, 5 years later, did something to the weight she had been distributing across her body for 60 months. It did not make it lighter. It made it more precisely located, which is a different thing and in some ways more useful. She unfolded the letter. Pentagon letterhead. The specific cream stock she recognized from the redacted materials she had received through official channels in the months after her medical discharge. She read the first paragraph. Read it again. Formal declassification proceedings for the operational record of Recon Med 9 had been initiated. The process had been moving through the specific bureaucratic architecture required to acknowledge the official existence of something that had officially never existed. Classification levels, interagency, coordination, legal frameworks built to handle exactly this category of institutional acknowledgement. It was moving slowly for the specific reasons that such things always move slowly. But it was moving. The 6 names would be entered into the permanent record, read aloud, documented. The 2 living operators would be present when it happened, before the end of the year. Serena folded the letter, set it on the tray table, put her hand over it, not pressing, just resting. The way you put your hand on something you want to make sure is real. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 years, Tillman said. The operational security around the program's dissolution made that. "I know," she said quietly. Not dismissing him. Just she knew. She had understood from the shape of the redactions and the silence and the specific quality of the institutional absence that followed, that the people who might have been looking were not looking in ways that could reach her. She had made her peace with that. Or she had made a version of peace that was really just a very disciplined form of carrying. In the galley, the curtain moved. James emerged. His face was composed in the careful way of a man who has just had a significant conversation and is now required to re-enter a space where people can read faces. He looked at Serena in 1B. He looked at Tillman in 1C. He looked at the photograph on the tray table. He went back to his station without speaking. Brenda did not emerge from the galley. Greer had closed his laptop. He was sitting with his hands on his knees, in the specific posture of a man who has had an hour to think about something and has arrived at a conclusion he does not particularly enjoy but cannot argue with. He looked at Serena's profile for a moment, the tired eyes, the badge still on her chest, the bracelet with its 6 tags, and then he looked at the seat back in front of him, with the expression of a man examining the distance between who he thought he was this morning and who the morning has revealed him to be. He turned. He looked directly at Serena. "Dr. Wade." She looked at him. "I apologize." He said it without managing it, without the throat clearing and the conditional language and the performance of remorse that is actually remorse at having been caught, rather than remorse at the thing itself. He said it the way a man says something when he has finally, in the space of one flight, understood something about himself that he cannot unfind. "What I said was wrong. I'm sorry." Serena looked at him for a moment, with the level, unhurried attention of a woman who has forgiven considerably more serious things in considerably more difficult circumstances, and has learned that the weight of carrying unforgiveness is never worth what it costs. "Thank you, Mr. Greer," she said. That was all. No performance. No making him feel better than he deserved to feel. Just the clean, complete acknowledgement of a person who has accepted something and moved on, which is the only form of forgiveness that actually costs the person offering it anything. Greer nodded once, turned back to the seat in front of him, and then in row 4, Craig Daniels looked at his phone. The clip had 214,000 views. The comments were a wall of certainty about a woman none of them had ever met in a situation none of them had seen. He scrolled through them with the growing and specific discomfort of a man who is beginning to understand the shape of what he has done. He looked at the back of the woman's head in seat 1B. He looked at his phone. He did not know her name. He did not know what was on her wrist. He did not know what was on the tray table in front of her, or what the man across the aisle had said to her for the last 20 minutes. He knew only that the comments on his post were not describing the woman he had been sitting 4 rows behind for the last 3 hours, and that 214,000 people had already made up their minds. His thumb hovered over the delete button. Outside, the first suggestion of Atlanta was visible through the thinning cloud cover, the geometry of a city that did not know and did not need to know what was happening above it. The plane began its descent. The descent had begun, and the cabin had settled into the specific quiet of people who have witnessed something they will be describing to other people for years and are now in the process of deciding how they will tell it. Tillman was still in 1C. He had not moved back to row 5. There was no reason to. The conversation had found the shape it needed, and he was not a man who interrupted a shape once it had found itself. Serena was looking at the photograph again. Not with the searching urgency of someone looking for something they have not yet found, but with the slow, deliberate attention of someone who is giving each face the time it deserves, because time is the only thing she still has left to give. She touched the edge of the photograph with one finger. Just the edge. "The hardest part," she said quietly, and then she stopped. Not because she had decided not to continue, because she was choosing the words with the care that the words required. Tillman waited. He was very good at waiting. It was one of the things 38 years had given him that had transferred cleanly to civilian life. "The hardest part wasn't the mission," she said. "I trained for the mission. Everything I had, every year, every hour, every decision I had made since I was 22 years old, it was available when I needed it. Completely." She paused. "The hardest part was 6 months later. Sitting in the trauma bay at Cook County at 3 in the morning, patient stable room quiet, nothing left to do, and understanding for the first time in a way that was sustained and unavoidable, that quiet was something they were never going to have again." She looked at the 6 tags on her bracelet, each one engraved with a name in letters so small you had to know what you were looking for to read them. She had read them so many times that she no longer needed to look. "I couldn't put it down," she said. "The knowing. I kept trying to find somewhere to set it, and there was nowhere. So I just learned to carry it differently, distributed it, made it part of the weight instead of separate from it." Tillman looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the thing he had been carrying for 3 years in the locked drawer alongside the report. "Page 14, he said. "The section describing the extraction, what you carried, the distance, the conditions." He paused. "I have never finished that page without sitting quietly for several minutes afterward. Not once in 11 readings. The 11th time was 2 weeks ago, and it was the same as the first." Serena looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not softening exactly. More like the specific adjustment of a person who has been holding something at arm's length for a long time and has just found that the effort is no longer necessary. "Did it say why I went back?" she asked. "It noted that you returned for the second operator after completing the first extraction. It didn't say why." "No." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Atlanta was assembling itself below the clouds, the highways, the sprawl, the specific geometry of a southern city seen from above in morning light. "Because he was there," she said simply. Marcus was there, and he was alive, and I was the only person who knew where he was. That's the whole reason. There wasn't another one. Tillman nodded once. Not as commentary, as receipt. As the acknowledgement of a man who has spent 38 years trying to understand the specific category of decision that produces that answer, and has concluded that it cannot be trained into a person. It can only be discovered in them in the moments that require it. Behind them in row 4, Craig Daniels had not deleted the post. His thumb had hovered for 40 seconds and then moved away. The post had 308,000 views now. He had put his phone face down on his tray table and was looking at the seat back in front of him with the expression of a man who has made a decision he has already begun regretting, but has not yet found the mechanism to reverse. In the galley, Brenda Cole was sitting on the jump seat with her hands in her lap. James was at the forward station. They had not spoken in 20 minutes. The conversation they had finished 20 minutes ago had covered in James's careful and methodical way the 2 prior HR complaints, the specific pattern they represented, the 3 passengers who had witnessed the water glass incident and would be available as documentation, and the particular weight that a Pentagon consultant's first-hand account carried in an airline's internal review process. Brenda had listened to all of it with the specific stillness of a person receiving information about consequences that have been building for 3 years and have finally arrived all at once on a Tuesday morning somewhere over Tennessee. She had not cried. She was not the kind of woman who cried in galleys, but something in her face had changed, and the change was the kind that does not fully reverse. Greer had been sitting with his hands on his knees for 20 minutes. He had opened his laptop twice and closed it twice. He had looked at Serena's profile 3 times, with the expression of a man trying to calculate something, for which he does not currently have all the variables. On his 4th look, he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. He held it for a moment, looking at it. Then he leaned forward and handed it quietly to James, who was passing through the cabin. He said something to James in a low voice. James looked at the card, looked at Greer, nodded once. Serena did not see this. She was looking at the photograph. At Devin Haynes, 3rd from the right, 26 years old, grinning. "He's good," she said. "Devin, you said he's doing well." "He is," Tillman said. "He asked about you 3 months ago through a Veterans Network contact. He asked if anyone had heard from the other survivor." Serena looked up. "He doesn't know you're coming," Tillman said. "No." "But he's been waiting," Tillman said, in the way that people wait when they don't know they're waiting. Serena folded the photograph along its original crease. She folded it carefully, with the practiced care of someone returning something to a place it will be kept. She placed it in the front pocket of her scrub top against her chest beside the hospital badge. She looked at the letter on the tray table. The 6 names entered into the permanent record. Read aloud. Documented before the end of the year. "They deserve to be remembered properly," Tillman said. Serena looked at the bracelet on her left wrist, at the 6 tags worn smooth from 5 years of daily contact. "They already are," she said quietly. "I make sure of it. Every single day." The wheels touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson at 11:47 a.m. The cabin exhaled. Seatbelt signs chimed off. The ordinary machinery of arrival began its reassembly. Nobody in first class moved immediately. The seatbelt sign went dark, and the cabin came back to life with the specific organized urgency of people reassembling themselves for the world they had left 3 hours ago. But first class moved slowly, not because of the bags or the aisle or the ordinary friction of deplaning, because of the specific weight of a shared experience that has not yet finished being processed, that requires more time than the gap between landing and standing offers, and that people are carrying carefully as they rise and reach for their things. The woman in 2B, Her name was Patricia, a middle school principal from Decatur, who had been flying back from a conference in Chicago, was the first person to move through the aisle. She stopped beside seat 1B. She looked at Serena with the direct, uncomplicated sincerity of a woman who has decided that the cost of saying nothing is higher than the cost of saying something imperfect. "Thank you for your service," she said. "Both kinds." Serena looked up at her, nodded once. "Thank you." Patricia moved on. The man in 2A followed eyes forward, the specific forward-focused movement of a person who has decided that the most honest thing he can offer is the acknowledgement that he has nothing adequate to say and will not insult the moment by pretending otherwise. Tyler in row 3 deplaned without looking at Greer. This was not an accident. Greer noticed. He noticed in the specific registering way of a man who has been made uncomfortable, not by confrontation, but by the quiet, deliberate withdrawal of something he had previously taken for granted. Tyler had worked for him for 2 years. In 2 years, Tyler had not once deplaned before him. He had always waited. It was one of those small, ambient signals of professional deference that you stop noticing until the day it isn't there, and then you notice it completely. Greer stood. He gathered his bag. He moved toward the aisle. He stopped at row 1. Serena was gathering her conference papers, sliding the damaged stack into a folder, with the careful, accepting movements of someone who has made peace with something she cannot undo. The top third of every page bore the soft tide mark of the water. 14 months of work imperfectly preserved, still presentable, still hers. "Dr. Wade," Greer said. She looked up. He stood in the aisle with his bag on his shoulder, and the expression of a man who came onto this plane this morning as one version of himself and is deplaning as a version that is not entirely different, but has had something significant rearranged in it. Something structural. The kind of rearrangement that does not reverse overnight. "I meant what I said," he told her. "What I did was wrong. Not just rude. Wrong. And I'm not going to make it about what I didn't know because that's not the point." Serena looked at him for a moment. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He nodded. He moved on. At the jetway entrance, he stopped James with 2 fingers on his arm. He produced the business card he had handed over mid-flight, confirmed James had it, and said 3 sentences in a low voice. James looked at the card, looked at Greer with the careful, assessing expression of a man determining whether what he is hearing is genuine or the performance of genuineness, which are not the same thing and can usually be distinguished by the eyes. He decided it was genuine. He said he would pass it along. Tillman was the last person in first class to stand. He rose with the unhurried ease of a man for whom arrival is never the end of the work, just the transition between one form of it and the next. He looked at Serena, who was sliding the last of her papers into her bag. He straightened, not dramatically, not with announcement. With the clean, deliberate precision of a man for whom this gesture is not a performance, but a language, the oldest and most specific language his profession had given him, reserved for things that have earned it completely and without qualification. He saluted her. Full marine, right hand precise angle held for 3 full seconds. The jetway was visible beyond the open cabin door. Passengers from rows 6 through 12 were filing past. Several of them stopped. Not all of them understood what they were seeing, but all of them understood that they were seeing something, and that the something required stillness. Nobody spoke. Serena looked at him for one long moment. Then she stood. She was still in her scrubs, badge still on her chest, conference folder under one arm. She was exhausted in the specific bone-deep way of a person who has been awake for 31 hours and has spent those hours doing things that matter. She returned the salute. Not with Tillman's military precision, she had been out for 5 years, and the geometry was slightly softer than it had been. But the intention was exact. The weight behind it was exact. The cabin was completely silent. Then it was over, and they were simply two people in an airplane aisle, and the world outside was continuing, and there was a cab to catch, and a hotel room, and a conference presentation in 5 hours, and a rehabilitation center on Claremont Road, where a man named Devin Haynes was going about his Tuesday, without knowing that the morning had something for him. She walked up the jetway with her bag on her shoulder and her folder under her arm. She did not look back. In the cabin behind her, Craig Daniels was still in row 4. His phone was in his hand. The post had 411,000 views. He had read 411,000 words of certainty about a woman those people had never met. And he had written the caption that made all of it possible, and he had done it with 47 seconds of footage that he had cropped to show the part of the story that confirmed what he had already decided was happening. He deleted the post. No announcement, no replacement post, no explanation. Just gone. The comments, the views, the 411,000 certainties erased, with the specific quiet irreversibility of a person who cannot undo the thing he did, but can stop adding to it. He sat in row 4 until the cabin was empty. Then he walked up the jetway alone. At the airline's operations center that afternoon, the duty manager received a formal report from James. 3 passenger witness statements, a Pentagon consultant's account, the water glass incident documented, the ID request documented, the words spoken at the volume of a woman who had not been trying to be discreet documented. Brenda Cole was placed on administrative leave at 4:17 p.m. Pending investigation, her third. The airline's legal department noted in the internal memo generated that afternoon that the prior 2 complaints had been resolved without formal action. They noted this in the specific tone of an institution that has just understood that the cost of that pattern is no longer abstract. Serena was in a cab on I-85 when her phone buzzed. A news alert the clip had been deleted, but screenshots were spreading. A journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had already made contact with the airline. She turned her phone face down on the seat beside her. The cab driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Long day. Long morning," she said. He nodded. He did not ask anything else. Some passengers in his experience needed to talk. Some needed the opposite. This woman in her hospital clothes with her folder on her lap and her eyes on the city moving past the window needed the opposite. He drove. The VA Rehabilitation Center on Claremont Road was 43 minutes from the airport in Tuesday midday traffic. Serena watched Atlanta assemble itself outside the window, the familiar and the unfamiliar, the streets she had not driven since a conference 3 years ago, the city continuing its ordinary work beneath the unremarkable sky. She reached the center at 12:51 p.m. She asked at the front desk for Devin Haynes. The woman at the desk checked the directory. 3rd floor, room 312. Serena took the elevator. The doors opened onto a long corridor with the specific institutional light that hospitals and rehabilitation centers share the fluorescent patience of spaces designed for the long work of recovery. She walked the corridor counting room numbers with the same calm she brought to hospital corridors in Chicago, the professional familiarity of a person for whom these spaces are not intimidating, but simply the rooms where the real work happens. She stopped outside room 312. She stood there with her hand not quite touching the door. Everything the morning had given her pressing against the inside of her chest, with the specific weight of things that have finally arrived somewhere after a very long distance. She raised her hand. She knocked. From inside a voice. "Yeah, come in." She opened the door. Devin Haynes was sitting up in a chair beside the window, not in a bed. He had graduated from the bed 6 weeks ago, a milestone his physical therapist had documented with the specific professional satisfaction of someone who marks progress in increments small enough that each one matters. He was 31 years old, thinner than the photograph. Left leg in a brace from the knee down, the kind of brace that is not temporary, but has been engineered for a permanent accommodation. His face carried the specific geography of someone rearranged by something that happened in a place that does not appear on maps in ways that are visible if you know what you are looking at, and invisible if you do not. He looked at the door. He looked at Serena. He was very still for a moment, the specific, total stillness of a person whose mind has just encountered something it was not prepared for and is running the rapid, wordless process of verification. Making sure. Because in 5 years there had been false positives, faces in crowds that resolved into strangers when you got close enough. The brain's tendency to find the people it is looking for in the people who happen to be present. But this was not a crowd, and this resolved correctly. Serena, he said. Not a question. Just her name said, in the specific way of someone returning something they have been holding for a long time to the person it belongs to. She stepped into the room. Let the door close behind her. She looked at him. At the brace. At the chair by the window where the Atlanta afternoon was coming in low and golden through the glass. At his left wrist, and there it was. The same silver chain. The same 6 small tags worn smooth from 5 years of daily contact, each one a name, each name a person. Each person a weight distributed across 2 wrists on opposite ends of a country that had been carrying them separately until this Tuesday. She looked at her own wrist. She sat down in the chair across from him without being invited because the invitation was 5 years old and had never expired. They were quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people who do not know what to say. The full quiet of people who know exactly what there is to say and understand that the saying of it is going to take longer than a moment and that the moment itself deserves to be acknowledged before the saying begins. I wondered when you'd show up, Devin said. Something in Serena's chest moved. Not broke moved. The specific internal movement of something that has been held in a fixed position for a very long time and has just been given permission to shift. I should have come sooner, she said. You came, he said simply. That's the whole thing. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the mission, not directly, not at first. About the work. His patience, the slow architecture of recovery. The specific satisfaction of watching a person who has been told a thing is permanent. Discover that permanent has more flexibility in it than the word suggests. About her research, the conference presentation in 5 hours, the 14 months of work that had gotten wet on a plane this morning and was still somehow intact. About Chicago. About Atlanta. About the small, ordinary details of lives being lived in the aftermath of something large, which is the only way lives ever get lived in the end. About Marcus Webb, eventually. About the way Marcus had always known exactly what to say in the specific moments when saying the wrong thing was the most available option. About Keisha Torres, who had sung badly and enthusiastically and without any self-consciousness on every flight into theater, and how the silence where that had been was its own kind of presence. About all 6, one at a time. Named. Spoken. Given the specific dignity of being remembered by people who actually knew them, which is the only form of memory that holds the full weight of a person rather than just the outline. Devin looked at his bracelet while Serena talked. She looked at hers while he talked. They were not performing grief. They were just present with it. Which is different. Which is the thing that 5 years of carrying it alone had not fully allowed either of them to be. Outside the window, the Atlanta afternoon did what October afternoons do in the South, came in low and golden, and unhurried the light, at the angle that makes ordinary things look like they have been considered by whoever arranged them. At 4:30 p.m., Serena's phone buzzed. The conference. She needed to go. She had a hotel room, a shower, a blazer and slacks that had been waiting since Monday, and 1,100 people expecting her in 3 hours. She stood. Devon looked up at her. "The names," she said. "They're being entered into the record. Official. Before the end of the year. We'll both be in the room." Devon was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, not easily named, not one thing. The complex, layered expression of a person receiving something they have wanted for long enough that receiving it requires adjustment. "All 6, he said. "All 6. He nodded. He looked at the window, at the gold afternoon. He nodded again more slowly, with the specific weight of a man accepting something that is both less than what was lost and more than he had allowed himself to expect. "Good," he said. "That's good." Serena picked up her bag, her folder. She looked at him one more time with the complete, uncomplicated affection of a person for whom this man represents something that cannot be replaced or replicated, the specific irreplaceability of someone who was there, who knows, who carries the same weight, in the same configuration, on the same wrist. "I'll be back," she said. "I know," he said. She walked out of the VA on Claremont Road at 4:33 p.m. and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, in the Atlanta afternoon light, still in her scrubs, badge still on her chest, folder under her arm. 33 hours without sleep. One flight, attendant, one retired general, one photograph, one letter, one man in a rehabilitation chair by a window. She called a cab. 1 week later, Howard Greer's assistant placed a document on his desk at 8:45 in the morning. A wire transfer confirmation. $2.3 million routed to the foundation arm of Cook County Hospital. Designated specifically per Greer's instructions for the endowment of a veteran's surgical fellowship, a permanent, named program providing advanced trauma training to military-connected physicians. Named for no one. At Greer's instruction. He had considered putting his own name on it, which would have been the instinct of a Tuesday. He had thought about it for 4 days and arrived at a different answer by Friday. The program would be announced in the spring. Brenda Cole's termination was confirmed 10 days after the flight, following the completion of the airline's formal investigation. The finding cited a documented pattern across 3 incidents. The airline issued a public statement. They issued a private written apology to Dr. Serena Wade. She read it once, placed it in a drawer, and did not spend further time on it, because there was a presentation to prepare, and a fellowship to advise, and a conference room in a Pentagon building before the end of the year where 6 names would be spoken out loud and entered permanently into a record that would outlast everyone in the room. And every morning before she drove to Cook County, she looked at the 6 tags on her left wrist and said each name once. Not for anyone else, just because they deserved to be said. Every day. Out loud. By someone who actually knew them. That was her answer to the question of what to do with still being here. It always had been. The people carrying the most are almost always the ones saying the least. They don't announce what they've survived. They don't ask to be recognized. They just show up in scrubs in silence with worn bracelets and quiet eyes and do the work. Before you decide who belongs somewhere, consider this: you have never once been able to read a person's worth from the outside. If this story reminded you that dignity cannot be given or taken, only recognized, subscribe and stay with us. Every week, another story about the quiet ones. Drop a comment telling us which part hit you hardest. We read every single one.